This came to us on the website blog post about staining and manganese. I've searched forever and spoken with a lot of pool supply stores and they all think I'm crazy. Hopefully you can shed a little more light for me. I'll try to condense this as much as possible. My pool was chlorine locked. I drained half the pool, refilled it, stabilized the water, and treated for yellow algae. I may have overdosed the algicide when doing it. The pool chemistry was spot on until about a week later. I walked out, the water was a little cloudy but teal green. I tested the water and the pH was through the roof high, way above 8. Chlorine was almost 0. I decided to shock the pool, and as I distributed the granular shock, it settled on the bottom. I turned the Polaris on to stir it up, and I noticed wherever the shock settled, now there were black stains on the gunite. The staining gradually went away over the next week. The next day, the pool was back to a crystal clear blue. I took a water sample to have it tested. Everything was perfect. All this happened over 24 hours. Now I've noticed pink staining all over the gunite. All the gunite is in the sun, so I've assumed it was mineral deposits. Steel brushes or stain stones won't remove it. Any additional advice you could provide would be great.
Okay. I guess I would wish I had a few more answers to some questions that would lead up to me being able to help figure this out. One thing I would like to know is how old is the surface? And what type of surface is it? You call it on the gunite, and technically it's whatever the plaster finishes over. This is obviously colored. I'm looking at some pictures here, so it's a colored finish. Is it a quartz-based finish? Is it a pebble-based finish? I really can't tell from here. Some of those things would help. It looks to me less like it's pebble and more like some type of a quartz-based finish, would be my guess. Hydrazo or Diamond Bright or something. What I would wonder, if you're saying that the surface, it can't be brushed off, we have two possible things that could happen. Is you have something topically, something on the surface, which while it may not brush off because it's adhered pretty well, it could be chemically removed. And that would be something on top, something that's attached to the surface. So if you have electrolysis, for example, again, I don't know if this is a salt system or not, but if you have any electrolysis in the water, and what happens in electrolysis sometimes is you have a positive and negative charge in the pool and it draws calcium out of the surface, out of the water, and attaches it to the surface, which would indicate maybe a little bit of that pink, although not necessarily. The other thing is you have the makeup of the plaster finish itself, and water chemistry can alter the chemistry of the plaster itself. And that also could be something that happened here, which would cause some of these issues, is if the surface itself is molting and changing. Molting's not a great word for it, but changing in any way. This also could be looking way back to whenever the finish was new. Now, I don't know if this finish is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years old. I don't know. But something that sometimes we don't see for many years, and people assume though that, oh, it's brand new, it's okay the way it is. And really there's a startup process that has to happen in terms of allowing the plaster to cure properly so that we don't have issues long term. And those sometimes show up later, that if that process wasn't done really well to allow that plaster to cure, you could get some molting and changing. The other possibility with that as well is dye lots. Over time, because most of these finishes that have color are mixed on site with a dye lot to dye lot can oftentimes start to show some change that you don't necessarily notice in the first year or two as well. So I don't know that I have an answer to what this is. It's a bit suspicious though that granular chlorine sitting on the surface of the pool was enough to alter the finish temporarily, which would tell me there's a chemistry thing happening in the plaster itself. If it's absorbing, or I would imagine that it would be absorbing the chemicals into the surface which is changing the surface slightly, and then maybe slowly releasing them back out. That could be an indicator that it's in the surface as well. And those the foggy pink spots could also be calcium being released. Whatever happened in the mix of water chemistry and all those things going on, there's always a chance that the surface let go of some of its calcium. And in that process of letting go, you could have gotten kind of blotchy spots that would look like foggy spots on the surface. So there's a lot of different ways without seeing it, touching it, feeling it, analyzing it. Pictures show me just enough to make me think of all the case scenarios it could be, and it could be something completely different than what I'm talking about. But likely, first I think kind of steps from here would be figure out if it's on the surface and if it in fact can be etched off of the surface. And you might be able to do that with muriatic acid. Easiest way to do it without draining the pool would be to take your vacuum pole, if you have one, or a small piece of PVC pipe, and feed it down into the water, down to one of those areas, and slowly dump some muriatic acid into the pipe. And what will happen is it'll settle down through that pipe down to that area, and see if some of that stuff can be removed that way. If you're doing that, rubber gloves, goggles, good idea, because you're dealing with pouring acid into a small cylinder, and it's always better to protect yourself there. If you can determine that it's on the surface, well then the pool could be acid washed to remove that unsightliness. If that doesn't solve the problem or doesn't help the problem at all, then likely it's an issue that's in the plaster, and it could be through all of this happening, many different metals in the water potentially could have come out of solution and gone into the surface of the plaster. So those are kind of it's a jumble of different ideas, but without actually seeing it in person, it's hard to pinpoint very easily. And I put those at least hopefully some spots to start and see if there's somewhere else to go from there. The water chemistry, again, sounds like you're got that under control. It's just that what has happened before this point may be leading to this problem happening.